Order, please. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I stand today on a point of privilege under very unfortunate circumstances. The rights and privileges afforded to members of the House of Assembly are a cornerstone and the foundation of parliamentary practice and procedure in our democracy. If our members cannot fully function because of outside interference, then the citizens of this province are not getting their full value for their tax-paying dollars. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 months, I firmly believe that my rights as a member of this House of Assembly have been dismissed by ministers of this government and their respective public servants. With regards to documents requested by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts concerning OIC number 2006-99 and OIC number 2006-101, myself and the other members of the Public Accounts Committee have vigorously tried to cooperate with the Office of Economic Development to have the documents in question fully disclosed within reasonable timeframes. Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of a compilation of information and to aid you in your ruling, I've provided a timeline of events to illustrate the willingness for cooperation from our committee and the reluctance to adhere to requests and warrants from the government. On February 22, 2006, the Public Accounts Committee passed a motion that read as follows. The committee directs the clerk to inform the Office of Economic Development that it wishes to receive, no later than noon on February 27, 2006, a copy of the office's complete files on S&J Potato Farms and Magic Valley Fun Park. If the Office of Economic Development fails to comply with the committee's wishes as expressed in paragraphs 1 and 2, the Public Accounts Committee authorizes the Chair to issue a subpoena to compel the production of the files and to compel the attendance of the witnesses. On February 27, Paul Taylor, CEO of the Office of Economic Development, sent a letter to the Chair of the Committee stating that Cabinet privileged documents have been identified as part of the motion from the Committee and that those documents would not be submitted. On February 27, 2006, the Office of Economic Development submitted a small package of documents to the Clerk of the Public Accounts Committee. Subsequent to the realization that the Office of Economic Development did not fully adhere to Clause 2 of the February 22 motion from the Public Accounts Committee, on March 1, 2006, the Chair of the Committee issued a subpoena to the Office of Economic Development and to Nova Scotia Business Incorporated for the production and full disclosure of documents relating to financial assistance awarded to S&J Potato Farms and Magic Valley Fun Park. On March 1st, after the issuance of the subpoena, the Office of Economic Development submitted heavily censored documents, which included censored emails between public servants with claims of, quote, cabinet confidentiality, end quote, to the Clerk of the Public Accounts Committee, giving what they described as full compliance with the subpoena. On March 3rd, as requested by the March 11th subpoena issued to the Office of Economic Development and Nova Scotia Business Incorporated, several more documents were submitted to the Clerk of the Committee. A written letter from the Department of Justice was included stating that the Office of Economic Development has complied with the subpoena. On March 3rd, the Subcommittee on Public Accounts met for the purpose of reviewing documents submitted by the Office of Economic Development and Nova Scotia Business Incorporated to determine which documents should be made public and which should remain confidential. The subcommittee, in reasonable fashion, determined that documents pertaining to S&J Potato Farms financial statements and T2 Corporation's income tax return files were to be kept confidential. On March 6, the subcommittee met again and determined that the warrant had not been fully complied with, and a letter dated March 7, 2006 was sent to the Department of Justice, pursuant to the Deputy Minister's earlier letter stating OED's compliance. The letter once again asked for the, quote, unsevered, end quote, documents to be submitted to the Public Accounts Committee. On March 13, 2006, the Deputy Minister of Justice responded to the Chair of the Committee, reiterating the stance that there had been full compliance with the subpoena issued to the Office of Economic Development. In the days following, the Subcommittee on Public Accounts met several times in the month of April, specifically on the 5th, 12th, and the 25th, reviewing severed and censored documents received from the Office of Economic Development, Nova Scotia Business Incorporated, and the Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board. On those dates, as is illustrated through Hansard, documented from those meetings, the committee, although frustrated with the lack of compliance from the government, conducted itself in a reasonable manner, giving specific consideration for confidential business information. The committee on all occasions decided against releasing information that was determined to be confidential business and personal information. Mr. Speaker, in the documents presented to the Public Accounts Committee from the Office of Economic Development, there are several instances of claims of cabinet confidentiality, Crown privilege, and solicitor-client privilege. The Public Accounts Committee, as stated in several generally recognized parliamentary House and procedure texts, has the right to request the production of documents. As stated in Robert Marleau's text, House of Commons Procedures and Practices, quote, where a committee meets with a refusal to provide a document it deems essential to its work, the committee may pass a motion ordering its production, end quote. On March 1st, 2006, the Committee on Public Accounts did just that. The committee also has the right to not accept the claims of Crown privilege that had been claimed by the executive on the documents in question. In Derek Lee's text, The Power of Parliamentary Houses to Send for Persons, Papers, and Records, it states, quote, in practice, parliamentary committees have more readily given consideration to claims of Crown privilege when invoked by a minister. However, in the final analysis, the committee remains final arbiter of such claims. Emphasis added, end quote. The Public Accounts Committee on March 1st chose to not accept those claims, and therefore by not fully disclosing the documents in question, the Office of Economic Development has not fully complied with the subpoena dated March 1st, 2006. Mr. Speaker, I also bring to your attention a letter dated May 3rd, 2006 from the Chief Legislative Counsel for the House of Assembly, Mr. Gordon Hebb, which clearly supports my above claims and my reasoning for standing in the House today on a point of privilege. I find it an extremely unfortunate circumstance that I must rise in the House today on a point of privilege. But, Mr. Speaker, I do firmly believe that there is, in fact, a prima facie case of privilege in this matter. Mr. Speaker, I believe that there has been substantive disruption in my abilities to perform my duties as a member of this House, and determining the extent to which our former Premier and a former Minister of this Crown acted inappropriately with regards to financial assistance awarded to S&J Potato Farms and Magic Valley Fun Park. Mr. Speaker, my rights and the rights of all members of this House have been interfered with due to the lack of compliance with the warrant issued to the Office of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, I believe I've provided sufficient evidence in this matter for you to rule on this matter shortly, and then deal with the subsequent motion I will introduce once you have made your final ruling.
The Honourable Member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place with respect to this matter, not on behalf of the Public Accounts Committee, but as a member of this legislature who also chairs the Public Accounts Committee. It is my view that the warrants have not been complied with as outlined in the facts set out by my colleague earlier. And I support the claim that there has been a breach of privilege of members of this legislature who serve on this committee. We have not been able to exercise our role as watchdog in the public interest of the expenditures of funds of this province with respect to this matter. And yesterday, the subcommittee of the Public Accounts Committee met, and there was agreement that we would bring forward at the Public Accounts Committee on Wednesday morning a report to be tabled in this House with agreement from the committee, looking for a remedy from yourself as Speaker with respect to the breach of members' privileges. So, Mr. Speaker, I do support, as a member of this legislature, the claim that the warrants have not been properly complied with, and that therefore there has been a breach of the privileges of members of this legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I will take the matter under advisement and report back to the House at my earliest possible opportunity. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Member for Preston.
I too, Mr. Speaker, raise on a point of personal privilege. I stand today, Mr. Speaker, on a point of privilege after receiving documents pursuant to the request and subpoenas by the Public Accounts Committee, several documents were highly censored due to claims of cabinet confidentiality and solicitor-client privilege. Although cabinet confidentiality may be a convention that has been in place for some time, the claim in and of itself is certainly not an absolute claim that should be taken at face value by members of our committee and members of the House Assembly. The term cabinet confidentiality is actually a claim of Crown privilege and is most commonly referred to as public interest immunity. This claim is usually reserved for matters of national defense and public safety, not for communications between public servants in regards of financial assistance given to a company, and most certainly is not reserved for information regarding who the target audience will be with a communications plan or who the key speaker will be. These are just a few examples of the absurd circumstances for which many of these claims have been made. The committee and the House can choose not to accept the claim, but the Public Accounts Committee has done just that. Mr. Speaker, with regards to solicitor-client privilege, the solicitor must always make the claim, but the client can lift the claim themselves or instruct the solicitor to do so. When the Public Accounts Committee first received the documents, there existed great confusion over many of these claims, given the information that usually provided regarding the reasoning for the above-mentioned claims. In the case of solicitor-client privilege, information is usually divulged who the solicitor is and who the client is. After several asks, the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice submitted a letter dated March 17, 2006, which states that the Crown privilege can only be waived by Executive Council, in other words, a cabinet, and that the legal advisor of the Executive Council, Attorney General, had advised the Deputy that the claim had not been waived. In the same letter, March 17th, the Deputy states that the solicitor in the claim refers to the Attorney General and the client is the Executive Council. Once again, the Executive Council and the Attorney General have waived none of these claims. This was extremely troubling and disconcerting. Now to refer to the procedural text of parliamentary privileges. Derek Lee's text, Power of Parliamentary House to send the persons, papers, and records. When discussing claims of Crown privilege, he states that this immunity has never been formally acknowledged by a House of Commons as inhibiting its investigating powers. And quoting Harry Evans, Lee goes on to say that the Executive Council enjoys no privilege which puts it above Parliament, having in mind that an overriding principle of the parliamentary system of government is that it must be the accountability of Executive Council, and any recognition of Crown privilege as an unchallenging right to deny information to Parliament is inconsistent with that of fundamental principles. After seeing the Public Accounts Committee did not accept the claims of Executive Council and the Attorney General, still refused to lift the claims and to provide full disclosure and comply with the wishes of the House and its committees, which is a cornerstone of our parliamentary system. Mr. Speaker, I rise today extremely frustrated that the rights that have been afforded to me by this House have been severely interfered with by the Executive Council and the Attorney General. The principle of Executive Council is not above the House of Assembly, is a principle that I believe has been lost in this current Cabinet and this current and former Attorney General. Crown privilege is not a right reserved for politicians to protect themselves from scrutiny. I reiterate that the common practice and common convention for the use and claim of Crown privilege has been reserved for matters that are national security and public safety. Mr. Speaker, the key messages and talking points and briefing notes regarding financial assistance is it a matter of national security and public safety? I don't think so. Mr. Speaker, the recommended spokesman and target audience on a communication plan a matter of national security and safety? I don't think so, and I have documents here which I will table. And Mr. Speaker, it is an email between two communications officers discussing wording and briefing notes pertaining to financial assistance awarded to a company a matter of national security or public safety? I sure don't think so. Mr. Speaker, I think the answer to all these questions is obvious. I believe the Speaker has to provide sufficient evidence for you to rule on this as prima facie case of privilege, and I ask that we immediately move on my subsequent motion.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I arise on behalf of the government to respond to the claim of privilege brought by members. To state the obvious, Mr. Speaker, the government does not agree with that view. Mr. Speaker,
Order, please.
This government respects the rights and privileges of members. And part of this institution, Mr. Speaker, is parliamentary government, Mr. Speaker, and there has been a long-standing tradition in our parliamentary government to respect Crown privilege, and an even longer tradition in our justice system to respect solicitor-client privilege, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in fact, the members who are members of the bar here will know that in most circumstances, members of the bar are also obliged not even to disclose the name of their clients upon request, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the suggestion that somehow that this is a novel claim of Crown privilege or a novel claim of solicitor-client privilege is just simply not correct, Mr. Speaker. In point of fact, Mr. Speaker, these are historical things, historical claims and historical practices of this House, and I am not aware of any situation where in this House, in the past, there have ever been the Crown or a solicitor-client relationship has been violated. So, Mr. Speaker, obviously we do not agree. I should also suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the suggestion that by the committee receiving the material that in some way privilege can be protected is simply incorrect. Mr. Speaker, as demonstrated by the committee themselves, when they went in camera to receive information and then voted, Mr. Speaker, to then go out of camera and release all the information that was in camera. Mr. Speaker, a privilege is a privilege, and it can only be effective if protected, Mr. Speaker, and that privilege works for the benefit of Nova Scotians by protecting our system of government. Mr. Speaker, we would obviously ask you to consider this matter and make a ruling.
Order. I will take the matter under advisement and report again back to the House as soon as possible. The Honourable Member from Clare has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on a point of personal privilege. Much like my colleagues, I believe that my rights as a member have been interfered with. A former Minister of the Crown has refused to answer several questions posed to him during a meeting of the Legislature Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Much like the power of the House and its committees to request the production of documents, the House and its committees also have the power to ask questions without limitations to any witness before them. As Joseph Mengut states in his text, Parliamentary Privilege in Canada, which our Chief Legislative Counsel, Gordon Hebb, has quoted on several occasions, and I quote, "A committee is not restricted in the scope of questions it can pose, and a witness must answer all questions put to him," end of quote. Furthermore, Derek Lee, who our Chief Legislative Counsel has also referenced on several occasions, states in his text, "The power of parliamentary houses to send for persons, papers, and records that a witness," and I quote, "is bound to answer all questions which a committee sees fit to put to him. Any refusal or failure to answer a question may be treated as a contempt and punished by the House," end of quote. Derek Lee goes on to say that, and I quote, "A witness cannot excuse himself on the follow grounds," and I quote, "that he or she has taken an oath not to disclose the matter about which he or she must testify, or two, that the matter was a privileged communication to her or him." One last important reference to a procedural text is from Robert Marleau's text, House of Commons Procedure and Practice, which states, and I quote, "A witness may object to a question asked by an individual committee member. However, if the committee agrees that the question be put to the witness, he or she is obliged to reply, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, after Ernie Fage refused to answer questions during March 8 meeting of...
Order. If you would retract and refer to the constituency.
Mr. Speaker, I will retract the honourable member from Cumberland North. Refused to answer questions during the March 8 meeting of the Standing Committee on the Public Accounts. Motion was brought forward outlining 3 specific questions, and the questions read as follows. First one, can you confirm that it was the February 7th Cabinet meeting at which the SNJ proposal was discussed and approved? Second question, is it correct that the honourable member from Lunenburg presented the SNJ file to Cabinet on February 7th? And if so, why? Third question, the honourable member from Cumberland North's version of what happened at the meeting was first presented in the Halifax Daily News, and the article reads as follows, quote, Fage said he is not in a conflict of interest. He dropped his department's case for an interest-free, forgivable loan to S&J Potato Farms, Inc. on the Tory cabinet table. Then he left the room while his colleague decided if the company deserved public money, end of quote. And is this version of events true? The motion states that these 3 questions are proper questions and that the witness will be given the opportunity to answer the questions in an in-camera session. The motion was carried. I believe the committee and its members conducted themselves in an extremely appropriate manner. During the in-camera session, the witness once again refused to answer the questions, placing himself in contempt of the committee and in contempt of the House. After being asked by several reporters on the matter outside the chamber immediately following the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, the former minister proceeded to provide some further answers and background into the 3 above-mentioned questions. After refusing to answer during the committee's meeting, both in public sessions and during the in-camera session, although the answers given to the media only aid in raising further questions of concern, the member did in fact provide more information outside of the chamber than he did inside. Having said that, the member showed disrespect, ill regard, and contempt towards the committee, the House of Assembly, and its members. Mr. Speaker, when claims of Crown privilege due to claims under advice to minister or due to cabinet confidentiality are made, often it's the practice to accept those claims given reasonable circumstances. However, if the committee decides to not accept the claim, then the witness is compelled to answer the questions or be found in contempt of the committee and, by extension, in contempt of this House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, it is through this contempt that I stand here today and ask for your favourable ruling on this prima facie case of privilege, and ask that you directly proceed to dealing with my subsequently motion upon your approval, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'll take that matter under advisement and report back to this Assembly. Continue with daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If it pleases the Speaker, I'd like to do an introduction first, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, in the gallery opposite is Mr. John Hill, who is a constituent of mine and a fellow I first met on a very cold January morning as he stood out collecting signatures on the petition that I'm about to table. To say that he is tenacious in ensuring that this got to the House, I think would be an understatement, Mr. Speaker. So it's with great pleasure this morning I'd like to welcome Mr. Hill to the House and ask the House to give him a welcome. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition, the operative clause, which reads, "We, the undersigned, responsible citizens of Nova Scotia, Canada, ask our government to declare that heating fuel is a non-taxable necessity, remove the HST on heat Mr. Speaker, this petition contains more than 20,000 signatures collected from people apparently passing through my constituency, but from around the province, and I have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a petition. The operative clause reading, "This petition represents our strong opposition to the expansion of the Alva Construction Limited Quarry." Also included are some serious concerns relating to the present operation of the quarry. It's from the residents of Upper Leaches Creek, Mr. Speaker, to which I have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a petition that's signed by 1,164 residents of Cumberland County. For a clause, we, the undersigned, believe the HST, which is on heating oil, electrical heat, propane wood used for heat, should be taken off this tax and items of necessary life. Mr. Speaker, I've affixed my name.
Petition is tabled. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of the Citizen Action to Protect the Environment, or the CAPE Group, and concerned citizens of West Hants. The operative clause, having just cause for concern, your petitioners respectfully request that you place an immediate moratorium on the use of vision as a forest management tool in West Hants. And Mr. Speaker, there's approximately 740 names in this petition. I have fixed my signature in support.
Petition is tabled. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition. The operative clause being, we, the undersigned, are against Nova Scotia Power's proposed rate increases. And if you share in this opinion, please sign the petition, and I have affixed my signature, Mr. Speaker. There's 4,485 signatures on that petition.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, may I have the honour of an introduction? Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, there's two police officers, Deputy Chief Dean Ruddy from Spring Hill, and also Constable Wade Keddy of the Bridgewater Police Department. These two gentlemen here today, along with other members of the police association, RCMP, to help support me in the launch of 7 pieces of legislation that will make their jobs a lot easier, make communities safer in Nova Scotia, and ask them to rise and receive a warm welcome to the House.
Order, please. The honourable member, order. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, and a point of order.
Thank you. On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice should know that this is petitions, and if he wants to make an introduction, that's fine, but I don't think this is an opportunity for him to grandstand. If he wants to introduce his bills under that order.
The honourable Minister of Justice.
Only grandstanding over there. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commit to this House not to do anything that the opposite members wouldn't do. Thank you. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a privilege to table a petition today signed by 245 constituents of mine of the Rodney-Windham area. We signed this petition and we're soliciting the government to repave the Rodney-Windham Hill Community Road, and I have signed my name to this petition.
The petition is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition concerning the serious situation at Stora Enso and the economic impact it is having on eastern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island. And the operative clause reads as follows. We, the undersigned, call upon the Nova Scotia government to do all within its power to bring about a successful resolution to the current crisis with Stora Enso of the Strait of Canso area. And Mr. Speaker, it's signed by 134 residents of northern Nova Scotia, and I too have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. Okay. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I table the petition, I'd like to introduce two university student leaders in the West Gallery. We have with us Lindell Musselman is president of the Student Union of NASCAD, and Chris Parsons, who's external vice president of King's College Students Union. So I would ask the members to give them a warm welcome. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the petition Operation Groundswell in support of fair access to post-secondary education. The operative clause reads, to make employment support and income assistance benefits available to single parents who wish to enter a university program. This petition is signed by 3,200 citizens, and I have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my honour to table the report, the 2005 annual report of the Halifax-Dartmouth Bridge Commission.
The report is tabled. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture, and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Minister responsible for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, I rise today to table the report Healthy Balanced Research Program, a Portrait of Unpaid Care in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Statement.
Mr. Speaker, today I remind Nova Scotians to take part in the upcoming Canadian census to take place on May the 16th. Individual and families across Nova Scotia can expect to receive their census questionnaires between May 2nd and May 13th. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that all of us in this House are familiar with the Canadian census. And after all, it has been taking place every 5 years for quite some time, actually since 1956. However, I'm not sure that everyone understands how important it is to Nova Scotia and to every Nova Scotian. Census data gives us a snapshot into the everyday lives of Nova Scotians. It gives us a valuable social, economic, and demographic information about individuals, families, and communities across the country and by jurisdiction. By using this and other relevant data, we are able to assess the unique strengths and needs of Nova Scotians region by region. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this accurate, reliable information enables us to determine the right programs and services for children, seniors, and families in communities and cities across the province. Ultimately, it means being able to invest where it will count, where it will make the real difference to our province and to our people. Mr. Speaker, completing the census has even more benefits for Nova Scotia. Major federal funding programs are based in part on census population counts. Right now, federal transfer payments account for about 35% of provincial revenues. Revenues that are used to fund essential programs that every Nova Scotian uses every day, such as healthcare, education, and social services. Therefore, every person not counted in the census will result in lost dollars to the province. Mr. Speaker, as you can appreciate, I cannot overstate the importance of every Nova Scotian taking part in this year's census. Individuals can complete census forms on paper or via the internet. And there is a toll-free helpline in operation to assist people who are having trouble completing the questionnaire. The number, Mr. Speaker, for members' advantage is 1-877-594-2006, and I'd encourage all members to be counted. Sure. Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, May 16th, I ask Nova Scotians to please stand up and be counted. It will make a difference. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
On an introduction. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On an introduction. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place and introduce to the members of the legislature in the East Gallery people who are here from the Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the Status of Women. And I'd ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House. Bridget Newman, who is their Executive Director, staff member Denise Moore, who also is a former social work student of mine, I'm pleased to say, and Linda Carvery, who is a member of the council board and who also is a constituent of mine. So I would ask them to rise. I believe they're here in conjunction with the tabling of the Healthy Balances report, just tabled by the minister, and I'd ask members to give them the warm welcome of this.
Welcome our visitors to the gallery today. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very briefly, on behalf of our caucus, I would like to associate ourselves with the remarks of the Minister on the importance of the census. I'm not sure that Nova Scotians always appreciate how fundamental an accurate, comprehensive census is to good governance in this province and in this country. It is, for example, a fundamental component of federal-provincial fiscal relations. And so we agree with and support the call by the Minister in which he encourages all Nova Scotians to be counted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister of Finance for providing a copy of his statement in advance. Mr. Speaker, it goes without question that participation in the census is important because the data that is collected provides, as the Minister has stated, a snapshot of our communities throughout the province, and it enables governments to develop programs based on very valuable demographic information. But, Mr. Speaker, its importance becomes much more significant for us here in Nova Scotia. The recent Harper Conservative federal budget indicated that equalization payments to Nova Scotia will decrease. Now, Mr. Speaker, while the Minister of Finance was not certain as to the amount on budget day, all indications are that this province is going to lose millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, one has to wonder whether today's statement is an all-out plea to the people of Nova Scotia to protect this provincial Conservative government from the Harper federal government, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, let us hope, Mr. Speaker, as well, that the data, especially the data that's collected from seniors, will be used by the Harper government to change the formula to reflect the fact that our population is growing older, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's important, Mr. Speaker, sometimes the truth hurts, Mr. Speaker, but it's important that the former Premier of this province, Premier Ham, felt it was very important as well, Mr. Speaker. The question remains, though, is it important to our new Premier, Mr. Speaker? Now, Mr. Speaker, perhaps our new Premier could pick up the phone and call his good friend Prime Minister Harper and make the whole thing happen, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Liberal caucus, I encourage all Nova Scotians to participate in the census, Mr. Speaker, if for no other reason than simply to shelter us from Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Monsieur le Président, on May the 2nd and 3rd, researchers, provincial and federal policymakers, and community leaders gathered in Halifax to discuss the effects of women's unpaid caregiving on their health and well-being. The forum launches a year of communicating the results of the 5-year Healthy Balance research program. Caregiving is a largely unseen activity in Canada. It's often just taken for granted. If an elderly mother or father is staying in their own home but needs help with the groceries and getting to doctor's appointments, a daughter or son is providing caregiving. If a family has a child with a severe disability who lives at home but who needs 24-hour care, parents are providing caregiving in addition to performing the daily responsibilities and duties that parents do. Most of us will become closely acquainted with caregiving and with care receiving as the oldest baby boomers turn in their later years to their daughters and sons, friends, and neighbors for support with the activities of daily living. A recent survey completed through Healthy Balance shows that 1/3 of Nova Scotians provide unpaid care to someone who is experiencing an illness or health-related problem. The Advisory Council on the Status of Women, the Atlantic Centre of Excellence for Women's Health, and the University of Ottawa's Institution of Population Health joined together to bring this research into the policy-making arena. Healthy Balance research shows how much more caregiving takes place in this province compared to other provinces. Who provides care and what that caregiving actually looks like in a variety of settings and communities. Women who are traditionally underrepresented in research, such as African Canadian women, Aboriginal women, immigrant women, and women with disabilities, have played a large role in this initiative, advising on culturally appropriate research methodology and dissemination of results. Mr. Speaker, I tabled 2 of their reports this morning and invite members to read them. One shares caregivers' personal stories, and the other is a survey report. This is Caregivers Week in Nova Scotia, an opportunity to reflect on what can be done to support caregivers, whose work is at the center of many lives in the province. I thank the researchers and organizers of the Healthy Balance Research Program, but I especially thank members of the equity reference groups whose dedicated time and energy to this project, as well as to their work at home, has moved us forward in our awareness and understanding of women's unpaid caregiving. Some of these women are here today, Mr. Speaker. They are Denise Moore and Linda Carvery, who are members of the Equity Reference Group, Bridget Newman of the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, and Sharon Rayshore, Executive Director of Caregivers Nova Scotia. I would ask them to rise, receive the warm welcome and appreciation of this House for their dedicated service. Thank you, merci.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to respond to the Minister's statement on caregiving in Nova Scotia. I had the opportunity to attend the first day of the recent provincial forum announcing the results of the study. This was actually held in my constituency of Dartmouth South, Portland Valley. The 5-year research program results prove once again that the caregiving roles of women in this province have serious impacts on their health, their financial situation, their careers, and their family life. And the need for immediate action by this government to enhance supportive public policy and programs is very clear. So my party wants to thank all those involved with the Healthy Balance Research Program, and during Caregivers Week in particular, thanks all caregivers across the province who are providing care to family and friends. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Minister responsible for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women for providing a copy of her statement in advance. On behalf of the Liberal Caucus, I would like to first and foremost acknowledge family caregivers from one end of the province to the other. The role they play is vitally important, not only to the lives of those for whom they care, but also to various government departments and also to our society at large. I would also like to pay tribute to all of those involved in the Healthy Balance Research Program. I certainly hope that the findings in this report will find their way into government policy sooner rather than later. Yesterday we heard in the speech from the throne, While many priorities and plans were touched on, the word family caregiving did not come up during the course of that speech. This is a void and one that does need to be addressed. There are more than 85,000 caregivers in the province who day in and day out care for loved ones because they want to. They do so with little fanfare and many times with very little support. It's time to bring caregivers to the forefront. Let us as legislators acknowledge that they need our support and the support of government and society. The role they play has to be more integrated within government departments. Whether caregivers fall under the auspices of community services or whether they fall under the auspices of the Department of Health is immaterial. Their role needs to be supported and their value must be equally appreciated. Let us hope that the results from the Health Balance Research Program will be implemented so that this happens. Congratulations and special thanks must be extended to Denise Moore, Linda Carvery, Bridget Newman, and Sharon Riescher for their hard work and dedication on the issue of caregiving. It is our hope that their efforts will be supported and that this research will be used to place caregiving support high on the list of policy priorities for Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Government notices a motion. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall, 1, read and table the message from Her Honour to the Lieutenant Governor, transmitting the estimates of sums required for the service of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2007, for the consideration of this House. 2, table the estimate books. 3, table the Crown Corporation business plans. 4, table the estimates and Crown Corporation business plan resolutions. 5, deliver my budget speech. And 6, move the estimates of sums required for the service of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2007. Being supply to be granted to Her Majesty and the Crown Corporation business plans be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Supply. Mr. Speaker, for the information of the House, the budget will be presented on Tuesday, May 9th of next week.
Notice is tabled. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sidney Crosby became the youngest player in NHL history to break the 100-point scoring mark this spring, finishing the regular season with 102 points, 6th place in league scoring. And whereas luckily for Crosby fans, his hockey phenom and his team will be coming to the Halifax Metro Centre when the Pittsburgh Penguins play the New York Islanders on September 19th in an exhibition game. Whereas Sidney Crosby has used the time since the regular season to gear up for his second season as a member of Team Canada at the World Hockey Championship, which begins today, May 5th. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate our local hockey hero, Sidney Crosby, on his tremendous success during his first NHL season and wish he and Team Canada the best of luck as they compete for the world title. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Contrary by nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
I give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last Friday, April 28th, we joined together on the grounds of Province House in a ceremony to commemorate those who have died as a result of workplace accident or illness in this province. And whereas April 28th is designated throughout Canada as a day of mourning for workers killed or injured on the job, and whereas there were 23 workers killed because of workplace accidents and illnesses in Nova Scotia in 2005. Therefore, be it resolved that the Department of Environment and Labour continue to work with our partners and with employees and employers to create safe working environments and to reduce occupational injury and illness. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
There's a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary by nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Resolution. Whereas a volunteer group of citizens is working hard to bring the Shubenacadie Canal and waterway back to life, and whereas the Shubenacadie Canal Commission has done a stellar job working with stakeholders to promote its vision for this historic waterway, and whereas the Commission recently held a successful forum to engage communities and other partners in this process. And Mr. Speaker, I point out that waterway forum was held at the East Hants Rural High School last Saturday. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House thank members of the Shubenacadie Canal Commission for their contribution to this important project. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary by nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister responsible for African Nova Scotian Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, April 29th, Dr. Joyce Ross's career dedicated to community and children was recognized, the East Preston native received the National Harry Jerome Award for Community Services. The Harry Jerome Awards recognize outstanding achievements of African Canadians, and whereas for 3 decades, Joyce Ross was the Executive Director of the East Preston Daycare Centre, a facility that she helped found. Under her direction, the centre has been recognized by many institutions for its innovative initiatives and excellence in childcare. And whereas, although Dr. Ross has officially retired from her full-time work, she remains active. She is a licentiate in her church and ministers to inmates in prisons across the province. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Dr. Joyce Ross on winning the Harry Jerome Award for Community Services. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
I give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for 84 years the Nova Scotia 4-H program has taught young people exceptional life skills that help them to become responsible, confident, and community-minded citizens. And whereas this Friday and Saturday, 300 4-H members and their families will participate in the annual 4-H weekend at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College in Bible Hill. And whereas this is a superb opportunity for 4-H members to participate in challenging events and demonstrations. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate all the participants of the 4-H weekend and wish them the best of luck. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Express waivers agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister for Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I'll move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Maritime Travel is Nova Scotia's largest travel agency with offices across Canada, and whereas Maritime Travel's Chief Executive Officer Rob Dexter will be introduced into Nova Scotia Junior Achievement Business Hall of Fame on June 1st, and whereas Dexter, besides being CEO for Maritime Travel, is also Chair of the Board of Directors of Empire Company, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House recognize the immense business talent of Rob Dexter and extend to him our congratulations on his induction into Nova Scotia's Junior Achievement Business Hall of Fame. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the goal of Occupational Health and Safety Division of Nova Scotia Environment and Labour is to improve health and safety in the workplace. And whereas the week of April 30th through May 6th has been designated as North America Occupational Safety and Health Week all across the continent, with this year's theme being Review, Refresh, and Revitalize. And whereas the North American Occupational Safety and Health Week is intended to increase understanding and raise awareness of occupational health and safety issues among employees, employers, and the public. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House take note of the North American Occupational Safety and Health Week flag flying this week at Province House, and for all members to take up the cause by creating workplace health and safety awareness. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dick Huggard's involvement and contribution to the agricultural industry began by working on the home farm and continues today in retirement with his participation with many organizations. And whereas Mr. Huggard's career with the Department of Agriculture and Marketing began as a livestock fieldman and continued for 36 years up through the department to the position of Deputy Minister. And whereas Mr. Huggard spent time early in his career lecturing in animal science at the NSAC and was always promoting and recommending the NSAC to young people interested in studying science. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mr. Huggard, a graduate himself of NSAC, on receiving an honorary doctorate during the convocation ceremony at the NSAC this Friday, May 5th, 2006. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers requested is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 8th to the 14th is National Mining Week in Canada, and whereas mining plays a vital role here in Nova Scotia, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity through extraction and secondary processing, and whereas the positive benefits of mining, the jobs, the training and skills development and business opportunities support the livelihoods of many Nova Scotia families. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join in the celebration of National Mining Week. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I introduce this resolution as Minister responsible for the Securities Commission. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it is very important for all Nova Scotian youth to learn about the importance of saving and investing money for their future. And whereas more than 1,048 Nova Scotian high school students participated this year in the Test Your Financial IQ contest sponsored by the Canadian Securities Administrators representing securities regulators across Canada. And whereas the winner of a $750 Nova Scotia prize is 16-year-old Alyssa Mitchell, a student at Parkview Education Centre in Bridgewater. Therefore, be it resolved that the House congratulates Alyssa as a fine example of young people in Nova Scotia who clearly understand the need for saving and investing for their own future and for the future of the province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Combat the Production and Use of Illegal Drugs.
Good. The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Combat the Production and Use of Illegal Drugs.
Bill numbered 1, entitled An Act to Combat the Production and Use of Illegal Drugs.
I order that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Make Communities and Neighbourhoods Safer.
The Honourable Member from Coyle Harbour Eastern Passage begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Make Communities and Neighbourhoods Safer.
Bill number 2, entitled An Act to Make Communities and Neighborhoods Safer.
I order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 222 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Industrial Development Act.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 222 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Industrial Development Act.
Bill 3, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 222 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Industrial Development Act.
I order that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Make Communities and Neighborhoods Safer.
I think there may be an echo in the chamber. The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Make Communities and Neighbourhoods Safer.
Bill 4, entitled An Act to Make Communities and Neighborhoods Safer.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to prevent the closure of rural schools entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
Bill numbered 5, entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1991, the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1991, the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act.
Bill numbered 6, entitled an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1991, the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act respecting a Memorial Day to honor police and peace officers.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act respecting a Memorial Day to honor police and peace officers.
Bill 7, entitled an act respecting a Memorial Day to honor police and peace officers.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled an act to address the historic injustice committed against the people of Africville.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to address the historic injustice committed against the people of Africville.
Bill numbered 8, entitled an act to address the historic injustice committed against the people of Africville.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
I beg leave to introduce an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
Bill numbered 9, entitled an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act respecting the profits of criminal notoriety.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act respecting the profits of criminal notoriety.
Bill number 10, entitled an act respecting the profits of criminal notoriety.
Ordered this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to enforce a moratorium on strip mining in Cape Breton.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to enforce a moratorium on strip mines in Cape Breton.
Bill numbered 11, entitled an act to enforce a moratorium on strip mines in Cape Breton.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled an act to ensure fairness in fees collected by the Government of Nova Scotia.
Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to ensure fairness in fees collected by the Government of Nova Scotia.
Bill number 12, entitled an act to ensure fairness in fees collected by the Government of Nova Scotia.
Ordered that this bill will be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act respecting the administration of justice.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Administration of Justice.
Bill 13, entitled An Act Respecting the Administration of Justice.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce the bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 179 of the Revised Statutes 1989 of the Forest Act.
Honourable Member for Hants East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 179 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Forest Act.
Bill 14, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 179 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Forests Act.
Order this bill will be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 188 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Government Purchases Act.
Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 188 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Government Purchases Act.
Bill 15, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 188 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Government Purchases Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future date. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Protect the Personal Information of Nova Scotians from disclosure outside of Canada.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Protect the Personal Information of Nova Scotians from Disclosure Outside Canada.
Bill 16, entitled An Act to Protect the Personal Information of Nova Scotians from Disclosure Outside Canada.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise and beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 1991, the Energy Efficiency Appliances Act.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 1991, the Energy Efficient Appliances Act.
Bill 17, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 1991, the Energy Efficient Appliances Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 365 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Provincial Finance Act.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 365 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Provincial Finance Act.
Bill 18, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 365 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Provincial Finance Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 505 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Wills Act.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 505, the Revised Statutes 1989, the Wills Act.
Bill 19, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 505 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Wills Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabukto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabukto begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill number 20, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act.
All right.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act.
Bill 21, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act.
Ordered that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce an act to authorize the Village of Pugwash to make grants or contributions to certain organizations.
The honourable member for Cumberland North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to authorize the Village of Pugwash to make grants or contributions to certain organizations.
Bill 22, entitled An Act to authorize the Village of Pugwash to make grants or contributions to certain organizations.
Ordered that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 2000, the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 2000, the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act.
Bill 23, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 2000, the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act.
Ordered that this bill be read a second time on a future day. Honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of skyrocketing property assessments in Nova Scotia, I am pleased to beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
The honourable member for Halifax Fairview begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
I don't know where it is. Bill 24, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 497 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Volunteer Services Act.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 497 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Volunteer Services Act.
Bill 25, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 497 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Volunteer Services Act.
Ordered that this bill be read a second time on a future day. Honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Maritime Conservatory of Music and the Maritime Conservatory of Performing Arts Society.
The honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Maritime Conservatory of Music and the Maritime Conservatory of Performing Arts Society.
Bill 26, entitled An Act Respecting the Maritime Conservatory of Music and the Maritime Conservatory of Performing Arts Society.
Ordered that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my colleague for Timberley Prospect, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act.
The honourable member for Halifax Fairview begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act.
Bill 27, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act.
order that this bill be read a second time on a future date. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'd like to make a couple introductions before I read the resolution. Mr. Speaker, in the West Gallery today, we have a number of people who are here who are particularly concerned with early childhood education and childcare. And I'd like to introduce some of them, if I may. Heather Hanser Dunbar and her daughter Danielle are here this morning. Margot from Kids Are Kids. Margot Kirk from the Child Care Advocacy Association of Nova Scotia. Paulette Sadaway from the Canadian Labour Congress. Michelle Cohen from CUPE. John McCracken, also from CUPE. And Carrie Melsom of the Nova Scotia Child Care Association. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the House to welcome them this morning as they review the proceedings of the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2005, Nova Scotia signed a 5-year agreement with the Government of Canada to provide high-quality, accessible childcare. And whereas this agreement was terminated by the new federal government, and whereas Nova Scotia families require access to high-quality childcare to undertake work and other family obligations, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature urge the federal government to provide the multi-year funding necessary for parents in Nova Scotia to have real choices in childcare and early childhood education. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
This request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, May 7, 2006, Nova Scotians and all Canadians will mark the 61st anniversary of the end of the Battle of the Atlantic. And whereas the Royal Canadian Navy and the Merchant Navy made nearly 26,000 safe crossings of the North Atlantic, carrying over 181 million tons of cargo, which helped lead to the defeat of Nazi tyranny. And whereas each year the Battle of the Atlantic is remembered throughout Nova Scotia, and at the Halifax Sailors Memorial, a great granite cross of sacrifice inscribes the names of 3,257 Canadian men and women who were buried at sea. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House take time to remember those who paid the ultimate sacrifice during the longest battle of World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic. And I would ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I present this resolution on behalf of the Honourable Member for Truro Bible Hill and the Minister of Education. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Duval's Rink in Salmon River, Colchester County is the only Nova Scotia arena left in the Kraft Hockeyville search for Canada's most spirited hockey community. And whereas Duval's Rink is competing against more than 20 other rinks across this country, Canada, including the Miramichi and Plaster Rock in New Brunswick and Charlottetown and O'Leary PEI, and whereas Duval's Rink, its next test will come on June the 6th at 8 p.m. when CBC Television will hold a vote to narrow the 25 competitors to a short list of 10, with the final vote for Hockeyville to be held on June 11th at 8 p.m. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Duval's Rink for making it to the final rounds of the Hockeyville search and to offer their support to Duval's Rink and the community during the final phase of Hockeyville's vote. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the many loyal listeners of CBC Radio's Information Morning tune in regularly to start their day off right with insightful interviews, collegial banter, and the often self-deprecating humor of the show's hosts. And whereas Information Morning listeners surely attribute their loyalty and love for this program to the on-air personalities who are a constant reminder of the high quality of public broadcasting. And whereas Don Conley of Information Morning exemplifies this excellence as the consummate radio host, combining thorough knowledge of a vast array of topics and ability to ask the penetrating questions, but always respectfully, and the personal grace to see humor and irony in both the common and the uncommon, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Don Conley of CBC Radio Halifax's Information Morning on the occasion of 30 years of exemplary public broadcasting for the listening audience. And Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to make an introduction, our attention to the West Gallery, where Henry Dory from my constituency, a well-respected member of the off-reserve Aboriginal community, well known for his cultural activities, along with his son Kevin and grandson Nathaniel. I'd like for the House to give them a warm welcome. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the non-profit Annapolis Valley Work Activity Society has reached its 20th year of service to the community, and whereas the AVWAS has reached into the community to assist people in developing the necessary skills needed for the modern workplace, and whereas the Annapolis Valley Work Activity Society has helped the community, enabling individuals and families to overcome employment obstacles and improve their lives because of the commitment that has been made by the staff and volunteer board who give so generously. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House acknowledge the contributions the Annapolis Valley Work Activity Society has made to the community, congratulate the staff and board as they celebrate 20 years of service. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure and my honor this morning to introduce to you and to the members of the House a young gentleman aged 4 in your gallery this morning, Colton Lyon. And Colton saved his mother from a burning house back in February of this year. And by his actions, Mr. Speaker, he not only saved his mother, but however, he has accorded himself a great deal of fame. With Colton this morning is Shelley Lyon, his mother, Ralph Lyon, his granduncle, Lillian Lyon, his great-grandmother, Rebecca Layton, an aunt, Cale Layton, an uncle, Zoe Layton, a cousin, and that's the very, very youngest member in the gallery, and Gary Layton, who is his grandfather. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read a resolution after the House has welcomed Colton to this House along with his family. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Colton Lyon, who is all of 4 years old, saved his mother from a burning house on the afternoon of February 25, 2006. And whereas Shelley Lyon was exhausted from a surgical operation that morning and was in a deep sleep on the sofa in the living room where Colton was watching TV. And whereas Colton exhibited the courage of a true hero in ensuring his mother's safe departure from the burning home, the slight injuries that Ms. Lyon incurred could have been a lot worse had it not been for the valiant efforts of Colton. Therefore, be it resolved by the members of the Legislative Assembly of Nova Scotia that Colton Lyon be recognized for having exhibited knowledge beyond his years in assessing the situation and instinctively acting to rescue his mother from the burning home. This act of bravery is truly worthy of our respect and admiration. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 406 Squadron has been an important air squadron in the Canadian Air Force dating back to the Second World War. Whereas 406 Squadron has been located at 12 Wing Shearwater as an operational training squadron, first for the CH-124 Sea King, and now for the soon-to-arrive CH-148 Cyclone. And whereas on May 10th, a plaque will be dedicated to 406 Squadron on the 65th anniversary of the squadron at the Shearwater Aviation Museum. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognize the historic and current roles of 406 Squadron at 12 Wing Shearwater on its 65th anniversary, and wish all the best to those organizing the plaque dedication on May 10th at the Shearwater Aviation Museum. And I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 35th Annual Juno Awards were held here in Halifax on April 3rd, 2006, and whereas these awards are presented to the best that Canadian music has to offer in a wide variety of categories, and whereas Nova Scotians like Matt Mays, El Torpedo, Buck 65, and George Canyon were nominated for their outstanding contribution to Canadian music and songwriting, therefore it be resolved that members of the House of Assembly acknowledge the hard work and dedication by all in making this the best Juno Awards ever and recognize our East Coast musicians' great achievement. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice, please.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion's carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Terry Fox's Marathon of Hope is in itself an inspiration, but also inspires some amazing feats by amazing people like Victor Cormier. Whereas for 22 years, Victor Cormier of Bellecote canvassed door to door for cancer research, raising more than $100,000 before he passed away last week. And whereas his former RCMP sergeant, Navy veteran, who was diagnosed with cancer just 2 years ago, had also lost his first wife and a child to the disease. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House salute this local hero who said just last year to the Chronicle Herald, and I quote, "My purpose in life is to live my life with purpose," end quote. And he did just that. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas workers at the Highland Fisheries plant in Glace Bay have been locked out by their employer, Highland Fisheries, since March 13th, and whereas Highland Fisheries is owned by Clearwater, a global leader in harvesting, processing, and distribution of fish products, who is demanding concessions of $2.25 an hour from the long-term employees in this plant. And whereas in 1994, during the negotiations on agreement for internal trade, the province of Nova Scotia Liberal government of the day could have fought for concessions equivalent to those gained by Newfoundland that would require the processing of fish landed in Nova Scotia to be processed in Nova Scotia plants. Therefore, be it resolved that this government remind the owners of Clearwater that the fish in our oceans belong to the people of Nova Scotia and should be harvested to the benefit of the people of Nova Scotia, and urge Clearwater to return to the bargaining table to end this lockout.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Raylene Cantwell, the daughter of Raymond and Ann Cantwell of Bulledry, won the Frank H. Sobey Award of Excellence in Business, and whereas Raylene is a third-year student at Cape Breton University majoring in accounting, and whereas Raylene received her $10,000 award on the 16th of March 2006 at a presentation ceremony held at Crombie House in Pictou, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Raylene on her accomplishments and wish her every success on her journey to attain her CA designation. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion's carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sherry Ritchie, who helped establish the sport of hockey for women in Lunenburg, has been recognized by the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto after being named the Royal Bank of Canada's hockey leader for Nova Scotia. And where Sherry is one of 13 individuals from across Canada to receive an authentic Team Canada jersey from the 2006 Winter Olympics in Turin, Italy. And whereas Sherry, for being recognized by the Royal Bank of Canada, made it possible for $10,000 worth of minor hockey gear to be donated to the Lunenburg Minor Hockey Association in Sherry's name. Therefore, it be resolved that Sherry Ritzy be recognized by the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature for her dedicated community spirit and driving force in having the game of hockey from a Lunenburg perspective being placed on a national stage, and for her recognition by Canada's Hockey Hall of Fame. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers are the heart and soul of communities, and whereas every year each municipality recognizes volunteers who have contributed above and beyond the call of duty. And whereas on April 18, 2006, the municipality of East Hants recognized Ms. Bernice Donaldson as its provincial volunteer representative. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Ms. Donaldson on her selection as the municipality of East Hants provincial volunteer representative. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. Motion's carried. Honourable member for Cape Breton, the Lakes. Victoria, the Lakes, excuse me.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Katie Phillips is a Sea Cadet of Corps K147 Bedeck and is the daughter of Brian and Connie Phillips of Bedeck. And whereas Katie won first prize in the intermediate age group in Nova Scotia for her Remembrance Day poster and was presented with the Nova Scotia Nunavut Command certificate and a check. And whereas her drawing has been sent to the Dominion Command to be entered in the Canada-wide competition and a first for a student from Bedeck. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Katie Phillips on her accomplishment and wish her every success on her quest to be an animation artist specializing in Japanese animation. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion's carried. Honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Port of Shelburne is in the early stages of a proposed $12 million expansion, and whereas the Shelburne Port Authority is leading the wharf's proposed expansion, and whereas the study and business plan completed last year identified new customers while also identifying the necessary work required so that more than one ship at a time could have access to the Port of Shelburne. Therefore, be it resolved that all MLAs in the House of Assembly recognize the leadership being demonstrated by the Shelburne Port Authority as improvements such as an additional 100 meters of wharf frontage and a deeper draft through one-time dredging are contemplated towards making the Port of Shelburne a driving engine for the economy in southwestern Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April the 22nd, 2006, I had the opportunity to participate in Revolution 06, the first annual pledge-driven day-long spinning fundraiser to support the Dartmouth General Hospital and their hopes to purchase a new 64-slice CT scanner. And whereas the Dartmouth General Hospital has been utilizing a one-slice scanner for several years now and are in need of a more state-of-the-art, efficient, and less intrusive diagnostic tool. And whereas through Revolution 06, $30,000 was raised in support of the Dartmouth General Hospital Foundation CT scanner campaign. Therefore, be it resolved that this Legislative Assembly recognize all of the hard work put forth in this year's event by the event's organizers, New Bodies Fitness Center, and also by all those participants involved. Congratulations and thanks are extended to all of those who took part. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passes without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on November the 20th, 2005, 14-year-old Caitlin Ann Grace Saunier exhibited outstanding bravery and courage in the face of extreme danger by phoning the 911 emergency service line before jumping out of a two-story window while her house was ablaze. And whereas, unfortunately, Caitlin lost her grandfather, Warren Cromwell, that morning when he could not get out of the house in time and succumbed to smoke inhalation. And whereas due to the bravery of Caitlin Ann Grace Saunier and the training she received at the local Southville Volunteer Fire Department, she was able to save her own life and save the family home as well. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Caitlin Ann Grace Saunier for bravery in the face of danger, honor the memory of her grandfather, Warren Cromwell, and to congratulate fire departments and their volunteers around this province for their continued support in all of our communities. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas two musical friends and neighbors, Scotch Hills Dave Gunning and Salt Springs J.D. Fortune, will take the stage at the Halifax Metro Centre May the 9th, and whereas Dave Gunning will be the opening act for veteran rockers in excess at the Sold Out concert, and whereas Dave Gunning and J.D. Fortune grew up together in Pictou County and supported each other's musical careers over the years, making this concert a full circle event for both of these local artists. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Dave Gunning and wish him luck as the opening act for his old friend and lead singer, J.D. Fortune of In Excess. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the nation of modern Greece has made a long journey spanning more than 125 years to its independence, and whereas many individual citizens of Greece have since then undertaken the voyage to Greece, so that some 2,000 persons of Greek origin now consider this other maritime corner of the world to be home, and whereas the Greek Orthodox community of Halifax has built St. George's Church on the shores of the Northwest Arm and for more than 20 years has invited many thousands of Haligonians to celebrate the beginning of summer each year at the Greek Festival. Therefore, be it resolved that this House commend and thank the Greek Orthodox community of St. George for its creativity, its generous initiative, and its dedication to this province, and extend all best wishes for the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice I shall move this motion on another day. Mr. Tom McPherson of Glace Bay is the latest recipient of the Carl Campy Crawford Award, an award in honour of the first black municipal police officer east of Montreal when he joined the Sydney Police Force. And whereas this award is presented to someone who exemplifies leadership and commitment to justice, fairness, volunteerism, sportsmanship, and equality in their community. And whereas Mr. McPherson is involved in numerous community initiatives, including support of Glace Bay Elementary School's annual Christmas dinner, donations of books, and he's personally helped numerous sick children with money for medicine and travel expenses, spearheaded efforts to rebuild homes destroyed by fire, and was instrumental in helping raise money for the Cape Breton Regional Police Canine Unit. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate Mr. Tom McPherson for being the recipient of the Carl Campy Crawford Award and commend him on his commitment and leadership to the community of Glace Bay. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tidnish River writer Harry Thurston was recognized for editing The Sea's Voice, as well as an analogy of Atlantic Canadian nature writing at this year's Atlantic Book Award held in Dartmouth last month, and whereas Harry Thurston's book was shortlisted and runner-up in this year's competition for the Best Atlantic Book Published category, and whereas not only is Harry Thurston a freelance journalist and a playwright, he has published 9 nonfiction books, and his latest poetry publication, A Ship's Portrait, has been nominated for this year's Atlantic Poetry Prize. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Harry Thurston on his recent recognition, and we wish him all the luck and best in his future publications. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the state of rural roads in this province has continued to deteriorate, and whereas the infrastructure deficit to bring all roads and bridges up to acceptable standards has increased from $3.5 billion to today over $4 billion, and whereas drivers are paying high repair costs to their vehicles and economic development opportunities are being lost. Therefore, be resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature condemn this government for the unacceptable record on rural roads and encourage them to start investing in the rural infrastructure of this province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. I hear several noes. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lake Echo Fellowship Baptist Church had outgrown its current space and formed a working committee to explore options for an expansion. And whereas working over a 3-year period, the working committee organized a quick build project, and on September 5th, 2006, dozens of volunteers from all across our country built a 9,000 square foot addition to the church in only 1 week. And whereas the grand opening service was held on April 9, 2006 to celebrate this amazing feat, therefore it be resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate Pastor Frank Kohler and the members of the Lake Echo Fellowship Baptist Church on the expansion and for this amazing volunteer effort. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lunenburg County is very fortunate to have many volunteers who contribute numerous hours for the benefit of their communities. And whereas the town of Lunenburg, with a population of 2,600 residents, has over 60 volunteer organizations contributing to the well-being of the town. And whereas the town of Lunenburg has been recognized for the tremendous contribution of its volunteers and has been awarded the 2006 Model Volunteer Community Award by Recreation Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the town of Lunenburg on receiving the 2006 Model Volunteer Community Award and thank the many volunteers who give so freely of their time to help others. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Big Brothers Big Sisters of Greater Halifax is one of many nonprofit agencies providing essential programs and services for the youth of our community, and whereas the 30th Bowl for Kids' sake raised $250,000, exceeding their ambitious goal by $20,000 for the 2006 campaign, and whereas this funding will support all aspects of mentoring programming between adults and teens with children and youth within the Halifax Regional Municipality, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Big Brothers Big Sisters of Greater Halifax for their outstanding fundraising results, and thank all who contribute time, energy, money, and caring to support the work of this highly respected community organization. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Whereas the Kinsman Club of Sydney has given exemplary volunteer service in the Sydney area for many years, and whereas Sydney Kinsmen over 70 years have contributed much in service to their fellow citizens in making the Sydney area a better place to live, and whereas the Kinsman Club of Sydney will celebrate 70 years of service to the Sydney community on June 1st, 2006, therefore be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Kinsman Club of Sydney, its members past and present, for their tremendous achievement over the years and wish them well in the future. I'd ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Little Harbour athlete Amy Baird won the top offensive award in women's basketball at last month's second annual Holland Hurricanes Awards banquet. And whereas the banquet was held in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island at Holland College. And whereas the awards are presented to exceptional athletes like Amy Baird who work hard and are successful in their chosen sport. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Amy Baird on her recent award and wish her continued future success, and I seek waiver of notice passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the federal government has ended the practice of flying the flag on the Peace Tower at half-mast to honour members of the Canadian Armed Forces killed on duty overseas. And whereas the Deputy Premier of this province is one of many Nova Scotians who are urging that the flag be flown at half-mast once again as a sign of respect for the women and men who are serving their country in the forces, in war and in peacekeeping. And whereas the Chronicle Herald has urged Nova Scotians to speak out on this issue. Therefore, be it resolved that this House respectfully requests that the federal government resume the practice of honouring members of the Canadian Forces by flying the Peace Tower flag at half-mast to honour those killed while serving their country overseas in wars and in peacekeeping missions. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give motion that I shall move this motion on another day. Whereas Mr. William Billy Wilson, a lifetime member of the John Bernard Croak VC branch of the Royal Canadian Legion in Glace Bay, was presented with the Meritorious Service Medal. And whereas this is the highest award presented to any Legion member in Canada, and Mr. Wilson is most deserving of this award for his outstanding contributions to the Legion. And whereas Mr. Wilson is a very well-respected member of both the community of Glace Bay as well as Branch 3 Legion, serving as the Public Relations Chairperson for Branch 3 for the past 15 years, as well as Membership and Entertainment Chairperson. Therefore, be it resolved, members of the House of Assembly congratulate Mr. William Billy Wilson for receiving the Meritorious Service Medal for his selfless contributions to both Branch 3 Legion and the community of Glace Bay. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Liverpool Firefighters Association will be honouring one of its longest-serving members, and whereas this year local businessman Fred Lonis of Vino's Footwear will be celebrating 40 years of service to this volunteer organization. Whereas Mr. Lonis is a community-minded person who is also a noted member of the Mersey Branch No. 38 Royal Canadian Legion and a malicious supporter, he'll be honored at this association's annual dinner scheduled for tomorrow night in Liverpool. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their warmest wishes to Mr. Lonis as the Liverpool Firefighters Association celebrate 4 decades of his contribution to the association. Such dedication is not only beneficial to the immediate community, but to the entire community of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the school closure review process is unfair and does not take into account the community schools are also the cornerstones of our neighborhoods. And whereas on March the 29th, 2001, the then Minister of Education stated, closure of schools and consolidation is precisely aimed at providing better quality of education in the classroom to the students. And whereas the present Minister of Education does not appear to hold the same view as his former colleague and called for a review of the school closure process, Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislative Assembly congratulate all those involved in convincing the Minister of Education to review the school closure process and to thank the Minister for doing the right thing. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Steve Seelick, whose childhood dream was to become a police officer, grew up in 16 different foster homes. And whereas when he was 18, he joined the Shelburne Police Department, later moved to the Liverpool Police Department, and in 1968 joined the Halifax Police Department. And whereas on April 11, 2006, Mr. Seelick was honored by his fellow officers and presented with his retirement badge as a Sergeant in Detective Division of the Halifax Police Department. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House of Assembly honor Steve Seelick for his years of dedicated police service to the citizens of Nova Scotia and ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Pratt & Whitney Canada's Halifax operation in the beautiful Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley has been providing employment opportunities and economic benefits to the province of Nova Scotia for over 30 years now, and whereas on March 29th of this year, this manufacturing facility, which operates around the clock, 7 days a week, reached a huge milestone by going an incredible 3 years without a lost time work incident. And whereas outstanding safety and excellence in the aerospace industry is a direct result of every employee's and management commitment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate and thank Pratt & Whitney as they continue to succeed, achieve major accomplishments, and play a pivotal role in our provincial economy. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Atlantic Indoor Air Auditing Company informed the Cape Breton Regional Housing Authority on October the 25th, 2005 of the presence of asbestos in public housing units at the terraces in Ashby, and did not inform workers or residents until April of 2006. Whereas during renovations on the units in Ashby and Whitney Pier, workers cut holes in ceilings and roofs to replace chimneys, disturbing the insulation, therefore exposing both residents and workers to the potential dangers associated with asbestos. Whereas this government continues to tell residents that the risk is very low so long as the substance is not disturbed. Therefore, be it resolved that this government acknowledge that both residents, workers in these housing units in Whitney Pier and Ashby were most likely exposed to airborne asbestos while renovations were being carried out, and admit that conducting air tests 6 months following the construction does nothing to gauge the level of risk faced by the workers and residents. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas powerlifting is a major national sport and is a growing fan base the world over, and whereas April the 8th and 9th, Chilliwack, British Columbia hosted the 2006 Canadian Powerlifting Championships, and whereas Paul Gidney of Digby, Nova Scotia, shattered a long-standing Canadian record by lifting 1,617 pounds for the combination of squat, bench, and deadlifts. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize Mr. Paul Gidney in his outstanding achievements in the sport of powerlifting. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do this on behalf of the Honourable Member for Truro-Bible Hill. I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Agricultural College, one of the oldest centres for agricultural education and research in Canada, has evolved into an applied science university of excellence, positively impacting world agriculture and aquaculture And whereas the NSAC has over 100 years of experience in educating and creating generations of leaders who go on to play significant roles in agriculture, the environment, life sciences, business, and technology. And whereas we celebrate the NSAC and its students' achievements Friday, May 5th, therefore be resolved that all members of this House congratulate the NSAC's class of 2006 for their accomplishments and hard work and wish them luck in their future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver is requested. Is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to read this